Well, we're back working on the planter. I'm waiting on some parts to come in, but there's some things I can do until then. First, we are cleaning row units. We're blowing out where the seed tube runs and cleaning that out because there's tons of mud. Now I am going to get the brush. We're going to start cleaning eyes. There's 2 bearings I got to change. And we're just going to keep working through this planter and getting it ready for the next season. So I blew out everything in here and down here where the seed tube hooks in. And now just going to run this brush down in here and clean out where that eye sits. Because if you don't, you get false readings and that's always a pain. Blow it out, and we'll do that to every single row here. When I was doing my inspection, there was a few of these brackets down here that the spring hooks in for the closing wheels, and they're starting to wear out, so we're gonna pull those off and just weld them back up. And the weld generally lasts longer as well because it's a bit strong. You can see this one, that spring is just chewing away at it. There was 3 of these brackets. I'm gonna clean them up in there with the die grinder, and then we'll build them back up with the MIG. I just used a flap disc on the grinder to grind the edge smooth, and then the die grinder to just make a little bit of a bevel in there for the spring to ride on so that it wouldn't wear the spring out. So these are good to go back on. I had some parts in stock here, so I'm gonna start changing a couple bearings over there and then start knocking off some things on the list that I can do while I wait for the parts to come in. On this chain drive here, one of these bearings isn't great for sure, and possibly both. So while I have it apart, I'm probably just going to change both bearings because one less thing to worry about. Another thing I'm going to do to prepare for when the parts do come in to just get things ready and be most efficient is I'm going to start with the tail housings. We are putting the copperhead bearing kit on them because they're worn out, and I've heard good things. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get the flap disc on the grinder and just prep the ears where the collars weld on that the bearing fits in. So we'll get that taken care of, so then when they come in, we can just start banging them out with the welder and get this thing going. So from what I understand is there's a collar that sits here, and you just do a 1-inch weld on the top and the bottom. So I'm just going to take the grinder and clean it up because you don't want to MIG on a dirty surface. So I got all my parts in. My RK bushing kit, frogs, that's my second electric pump. We're gonna put 2 in parallel. A few miscellaneous things. Now we can start going through it, changing things out and buttoning it up. First thing we're gonna do is we're gonna change these. There's a couple of these little idlers that don't sound great. When you spin this idler here, it's got a bit of a shudder on it. Just shakes a little bit, so we're definitely changing this one, and then there's one on that side. I'm not sure why, but now I finally get to do a task on this planter that I have really been looking forward to, and that is changing all the frogs. I don't know why. It always has just seemed like it would be enjoyable. And I got my little creeper stool and my box of frogs, and we're just gonna put them on each row. And then I can check that off the list. Checking things off a list is always very satisfying. I highly recommend making lists. You just feel good when you get them checked off. Oh yeah, come on. Look at that. That is gonna be nice for that trench. So the next project on this planter that we're working on is installing these RK bushing kits. They go on your closing tail pieces, and you just weld this pipe or this piece of tubing over your slopped out hole, and then the bearing rides in there and it's not loose anymore. So then I got this old bearing we had in stock upstairs, magnet on the bottom to hold it in place, and now I'll just start welding all these pieces. There we go, I got the first one all welded up. Now we'll do that 30 more times. Finally on the last one. When I was doing the welding, I was just putting all the kits in here because I needed to get these pieces out, and this kept it contained. So each kit came with 2 bolts, 10 small washers, and 2 of these big ones. And you put 4 behind the bearing and 1 on top of the bearing of those small washers, put the bolt through with the big one in there, and then they bolt on here with the original lock nuts. We got one installed. I really like it, man. That's all nice and tight. There's no slop, but it's gonna be a pain to put them all on. Something that's very important as you're doing these is that your wheel or your closing frame is perfectly centered, and the distance from this to here needs to stay relatively the same on all of them, because otherwise that affects your closing wheel pressure. So I just cut a little piece of zip tie here to get the length that I'm making them all. I just slide it in there. I'll pull this frame back just a little bit so it's sitting flat, tighten it up, make sure it's centered, and we're good to go. So Andrew's torquing them down now. They need to be torqued to 85 foot-pounds, and on most implements we don't bring out a torque wrench, but it's important to torque all your bolts and fasteners on the planter, because you do not want to be losing them during the season. There's a few instances where you'd be going down the field. When we started working on the planter and we hadn't torqued things, then gauge wheels would be coming off, and just torque your bolts and you save yourself a bunch of problems. We got them all on, and man, that's nice. That's solid. I'm excited. That should be a big difference. Now it's just the tedious things of putting it back together. I'm gonna start putting on my True V's. I've got my 2 business cards, and I'll do my measurements and shimming, and we'll just start going through it now. It takes some time, but you gotta do it. You gotta set it up right. I got 2 brand new business cards so that we can do some marking. And then instead of a tape measure, I just have a piece of paper, or actually it's a business card, and I just have my measurements written on it. I just find it a bit easier and faster. On our split row planter, we're gonna put the best quality discs on the 30-inch rows because they see the most ground, and then the more worn out discs, they still are good though, on the 15-inch rows that we only use half the time. So to adjust the spacing on these, there is shims. So I got 5 shims on this side, and now there's probably similar on the other side. We'll put our True V's on, tighten them up, check it, and if we need to tighten it up or open it up, we'll adjust the shims accordingly. So now I got that disc tightened down, and I hold up my little measuring piece, and it's 3 inches, and that one fell out. So we are going to add a shim to move the disc out so our contact is less. I've got it shimmed now again, and the contact is just around 2 inches, which I like it there. I'm gonna keep it there, spin it, check it in a few different spots, and keep moving on. So I got the spacing set on it good. It's good in a few different spots, and it spins nice and freely. So now we'll just put the rest on. Well, we finally got all the True V's put on. I just finished torquing them all down, so they're good to go. And now put the dust caps on, and then we're moving on to putting on the scrapers. So yesterday I got all the opening discs buttoned up, and I'm putting scrapers on. And while I'm reinstalling scrapers, Andrew's going around the machine and checking for air leaks with the soap. We've had it on air for a bit. It's holding air really well actually, but there's always a few leaks to find every year, and it's going together.
It's leaking down by like 10 psi a day, so it'd be nice if we could get that to half or less, but we'll see.
Andrew's putting on meters, and I am getting these gauge wheel arms slowly put back on. I'm gonna just set them in here loose. I'm not gonna tighten them up yet. Then I'm gonna put the gauge wheels on, get those torqued down, and then we can set the gauge wheel on against the opening disc and then torque the arms down.
All right. Got the meters off. I'm gonna check the seal. Make sure the seal's good. Make sure the brushes are good. Make sure the knockoff discs are good. Whatever these are called. Give her a blow. Check this seal. We looked at these enough last year, but just double check. Put her together. Back on the planter. Row by row. 31 more to go.
Now we're getting the gauge wheels all loaded up on the cart. Well, I put a few of these wheels on and I realized they're not spinning. And that's because I forgot the shims that go behind them. So don't forget the shims. There's 2 behind every wheel. Here I've got the service manual, and they give you a bolt sizing chart and the recommended torque for each size. So doing those gauge wheels is an M16 bolt. It's a 10.9 and we're doing it dry. Actually, I think it might be an 8.8 and it's dry. So 175, I'll probably put it up to 200 just because we have had bolts come off in the past. So it turns out that these are actually a 10.9, and if you're torquing them dry, it's 255 foot-pounds. So we'll get the torque wrench set up and we'll start torquing the bolts, and then we will set the gauge wheel clearance and torque down the arms.
Bunch of shit in here. What do you guys do? You guys let that percolate, or do you clean that out? I'm gonna grab the vacuum and clean it out.
I am now setting the gauge wheel against the opening disc. I got this little tool that I built. You set it on sockets on the wheel bolt, because it's best to set them at working position. Now it's in working position. I've got this 4-sided wrench that I made. It slips on the bushing until it seems good. And it's dragging because it always gets tighter as you torque it. Now we'll torque down to 225. And you can see that wheel walk itself down that disc. Just like that. Perfect. And you just keep walking through. We are now just putting our closing wheels on, and I'm setting the width. We generally, on average, would be planting around the 1 inch, so I have the closing wheels a little bit tighter so that we can close the trench at that depth instead of where most of you guys would be planting 2 inch for corn. You'd want them spaced out a little bit wider. So we're getting them put on, and then we have 6 sets of furrow cruisers. I've really been wanting to try a spiked wheel. I think that there's got some advantages there. So we'll put those 6 on the front row on the other side, just so we can really see how they do and compare. I got the furrow cruisers on the cart, just read the installation guide, and we will get these put on that front row there. You can see I got the rubber ones on the back row already. I'm really excited to see how these perform in our conditions. Well, there we go. The row units are officially done. Top all the way to bottom, completely gone over, ready to hit the field. Now we've kind of gone through the maintenance and finding problems and putting it back together. The row units, they're all good to go. Now on the next video is where I really get to have some fun, and I get to build a automatic liquid switch for this planter. I have already made one, but this next one is going to be awesome and way better.